In 6 brief years, Grace Kelly became one of the screen idols of the century. When she married Prince Rainier, she seemed to be living a fairy tale. But the dream ended at this hairpin when she died in an as-yet unexplained car crash. All her life, Grace was the image of serene beauty, but in private she was often in turmoil. She was a woman of contradictions, often torn between her deep love of God and her love of love.
The family she came from was both Catholic, Irish, and highly sexed, and rich. And when all those combustible elements go together, you get a very active sex life being led outside the image that you wish to preserve in public.
I think she was a woman of prayer. She had a real devotion to prayer and the communion of saints, that is, that we pray for each other.
But no one suspected how far the quest for spiritual truth and personal happiness would take Grace Kelly. In the final chapter of a troubled life, her search finally led her to join a bizarre and deadly cult. A cult which has become a byword for death and suicide. Grace Kelly came from Philadelphia. At the root of many of her conflicts was a tangled relationship with her powerful father. Jack Kelly's first job was as a hod carrier. By his 30s, he had one of the most successful construction companies in Philadelphia. He had drive and talent. He always shone at athletics, and in 1920 won Olympic gold medals for rowing. He was a local hero and a strict father. His wife, Margaret, came from a German family and was as keen on athletics and fitness as her husband.
My mother was a disciplinarian. She did not take anything, any back talk. We always kidded. I said, today, Ma Kelly would probably be arrested for child abuse because she did not spare the rod. And she did not certainly spoil the child. She demanded obedience.
By the time Grace was born in 1929, the Kellys lived in a grand mansion in one of the elegant parts of Philadelphia. Grace was shy, often sick, and much less interested in sports than her brothers and sisters. But in one sense, Grace was a perfect Kelly. She was religious. Every Sunday they prayed at this church. Grace went to Ravenhill Convent School and was steeped in the rituals and mysteries of the Catholic Church.
Well, we were brought up by nuns, and so we had a very religious background, and she remained that way. We seemed to all be very religious. My brother was, the whole family. My father was strict Catholic, and my mother became a Catholic when she married him. So we were all very strict religious.
All her life, Grace stayed in touch with the nuns who taught her.
I thought she was naturally spiritual. Now, what can you really tell in a child of 12, 13? But we could see that she was a spiritual child. I remember one time we had a Christmas play, and she took the part of Our Lady, and she did it very reverently.
But Grace showed a more willful streak than any of the other Kelly children dared.
When she was a young girl, she was the rogue because she wouldn't participate in athletics. Grace, I guess that was her form of rebellion, was to not participate in athletics. And she went off to acting, which, I don't think quite in my grandfather's eyes may not have measured up.
Jack Kelly's brother George was a famous playwright in the 1940s. His comedy, The Torchbearers, was a big hit on Broadway. So when the 17-year-old Grace decided to be an actress and headed for New York, she turned to Uncle George for help. The official auditions at the American Academy of Dramatic Art were long over. But as he was so famous, he got her a private one. The verdict?
Her poise is good, but her voice is weak and needs work.
Still, they took George's niece. It didn't make her father happy.
He did not know New York and the stage. It was hard on Grace. He just had an idea that New York was... Too many things were going on, and he didn't want his little daughter to get, you know, wrapped up in bad things.
To placate her father, Grace agreed to live at the women-only Barbizon Hotel. Those predatory creatures' men were only allowed in at tea time, and never in the bedrooms. Grace spent more time at the Waldorf Astoria, where there were no rules. In New York, when she was just 17, a pattern started. She was a good Catholic girl, but that didn't stop her having affairs, often with older men.
She attracted boys, and she didn't try. I mean, she wasn't out, she didn't flaunt it, she didn't try. And the more she didn't try, the more they came.
She went out with Ali Khan. The Shah of Persia had such a good time with her, he sent expensive jewels. She had a relationship with the manager of the Waldorf Astoria. Her taste for unsuitable, un-Catholic men upset her father.
All of the men Grace was attracted to, if you think about it, were sort of artistic, European. They were a whole other thing than the Kelly sports pro, all-American macho man.
She learned not to bring too many of her New York beaux, shall I say, down here or into Philadelphia. She just learned it.
Grace was fighting to try to become a 1950s, 60s, 70s into the female explosion of women being independent, doing their own thing, supporting themselves. And Mrs. Kelly and Mr. Kelly were pulled right back there to girls obey their parents, girls behave in a certain way. And it was an enormous conflict in Grace's life.
Yet Grace often allowed her parents to end her relationships. They'd send her to Ocean City to cool off and think about her sins. Grace took it. But she didn't want to depend on her father for money, so she started modeling like many other young actresses.
Ginger Baker shows a shantung straw bonnet that costs a little more, but let's not quibble about cost, girls. Prices are down. And as pretty Grace Kelly says, why worry about statistics when it's Papa who always pays?
The newsreels couldn't imagine a young woman not relying on Daddy. Paradoxically, Grace, the glamorous young model, sometimes had to go back to the nuns for advice.
She came to see me on a Sunday morning. I'll never forget it. Lovely girl and very poised by that time. And she was modeling gloves and hats. She said, "Mother, I'm concerned about something. I'm trying to break into the world of modeling, and they're now asking me to model ladies' underwear. What do you think?" "Oh," I said, "Grace, you'll have to make that decision yourself and ask yourself questions. How do I feel even thinking about that? You must be concerned, or you wouldn't be talking about it with me." And then I learned later she never did that. So evidently, she must have been convinced that she shouldn't.
She was full of paradox. I think it's why she was so totally fascinating. all the time, even to people who knew her extremely well, because there was always another side of it. There was another dimension to it.
And many dimensions to her dress sense, too.
The lace forms an apron effect over the pale chartreuse underskirts. Grace visualizes herself in the yellow crepe. In the new silhouette in satin. In the strapless mantilla gown. Which will it be? Yep, you guessed it. She solves the problem by taking all three.
And she also took every chance to act. After 3 years of auditions, small stage parts, and some television, she got her break and was off to Hollywood to play opposite a dashing older man.
Will, we were married just a few minutes ago. We've got our whole lives ahead of us. Doesn't that mean anything to you?
You know, I've only got an hour and I've got lots to do. Stay at the hotel until it's over.
No, I won't be here when it's over. You're asking me to wait an hour to find out if I'm going to be a wife or a widow. I say it's too long to wait. I won't do it.
Amy.
I mean it. If you won't go with me now, I'll be on that train when it leaves here.
Grace Kelly always thought her performance in High Noon was very wooden, and that's why she's so good in it. Fred Zinnemann, who directed it, said she wasn't experienced enough to spoil it. She came along for the audition wearing white gloves, and Fred thought that was absolutely perfect for the Quaker bride in the film. A girl who hasn't really shaken the starch out of her religion and come to terms with what life is all about, and decides not to stand by her man, but to leave her man whenever he's threatened by the killers. And Grace looked at it, and she said, "My God, in my face I saw absolutely nothing." Well, not quite.
Ironically, like her father on the river, Grace wanted to be the perfect performer. She took more acting classes and soon landed a part in a sex and safari epic, Mogambo. Alfred Hitchcock saw her potential. Grace would act in only 3 of his films, but they made her one of the major stars of the 50s. The fact that they were both Catholics was a bond. She let Hitchcock mold her. He found unsuspected psychological and erotic depths in her. In To Catch a Thief, Kelly starts out as a glamorous clothes horse, but her performance develops into something deeper, darker, and far more sexual.
No. I was just wondering which was the best way out of here.
Well, the Mediterranean used to be this way.
He saw in Grace very much, on the one hand, the pristine, untouchable, discreet image of classic beauty of the day. But he also saw that, like, swooning romantic, that giggly schoolgirl, the flirt, So, you know, he captured all of that, and he cast her in ways where that could be used.
He was very, very interested in attractive women. You know, he liked very cool women. He liked women who wore sunglasses. He would like that, because that was rather mysterious, because you don't know what the eyes are saying, where they're looking, you know, that sort of thing.
He talked about Grace Kelly in terms of seeing the fire beneath the ice. What do you think he meant?
Oh, I know exactly what he meant, because that's the way he depicted all of the blonde actresses, that they were very icy cold and you know, in very, very much control of themselves. And you know, once they become involved romantically or whatever, they could just be absolutely thrilling women. Oh, yeah.
In the witty but stylized To Catch a Thief, Grace matched Cary Grant double take for double take.
Hitchcock would refer occasionally, in his conversations about Grace Kelly, to her white gloves. And what Hitchcock hankered to do was to put blood on those white gloves, because to stain the Virgin was a great part of the attraction that Grace Kelly had for Hitchcock. And in order to do so, he controlled her perfectly. He told her exactly what kind of reactions he needed. And he was very interested indeed in the smouldering amorousness that the ladylike exterior concealed. I think Alfred Hitchcock saw in Grace Kelly a lady whom he could humiliate. Hitchcock's obsessions really formed the personality and the appearance of Grace Kelly on the screen. And when he got his hands on women, he did so through his camera. He put them through it. He made the ladies suffer. And then he redeemed her at the end, and she finished up still a lady and intact. But again and again, Hitchcock cast Grace Kelly in the 3 films that he made as a woman whom he put through the ringer. And then, of course, enjoyed that.
In Dial M for Murder, Hitchcock's camera observed her as if she was a trapped animal. The stiff actress from High Noon now had real passion. Grace told one of the men in her life that she knew Hitchcock might have sexual fantasies about her, and she didn't mind one bit.
She did say to me that sometimes she had a feeling that he liked her very specially, but it was a very mental thing with him. It might have been a frustrated sexual appeal if he had a sexual fantasy for her. Well, so much the better, I think. She considered that a plus that would help her performance because he would put more care, more feeling on it.
In To Catch a Thief, she almost invites Cary Grant to seduce her and to rape her. She displaces that sexual desire onto the necklaces that she's wearing. But she says to him, you know, come and get it, take what you want, meaning take my jewels, because he plays the jewel thief in the film. But what she's actually saying in that subtext is, come and have me.
Ever had a better offer in your whole life? One with everything.
I've never had a crazier one.
Just as long as you're satisfied.
You know as well as I do, this necklace is imitation.
Well, I'm not.
She had one great weapon. She has that sort of delicate, subtle sex appeal. And the coolness of her and the reticence of her attitude camouflaged a very, very sexual personality.
Oleg Cassini was a well-known dress designer when he first met and fell for Grace Kelly in 1953. He wasn't surprised she played hard to get, but he was surprised by a paradox. The good Catholic could be ruthless when it came to other people's marriages. Grace at first discouraged Cassini.
She said, look, let me tell you something. You're wasting your time because I'm in love. I said, I admit this is an obstacle, but not an obstacle that cannot be overcome. And she said, well, I don't know about that. And I said, would you let me know who the lucky man is? And she said, yes, because that will stop your forward move, or some words to that effect. And she said it was Ray Milland. So I said, you're a very handsome man, of course. But I said, he's married, you're a Catholic. How can you even admit it to me?
Ray Milland wasn't the only married man Grace tangled with. Cassini had to compete against a galaxy of others, including her co-star, William Holden. She managed to get Holden to leave his wife, but he eventually went back. In coy 50s talk, Hollywood Confidential claimed that beneath the frigid exterior, Grace was smoldering fire. Confidential sniped.
Jittery wives in the capital of here today, gone tomorrow marriages have been on the verge of nominating her Miss Homebreaker of 1954.
She asked if we could live together. It might have been out of a pragmatic need she had because she was having a little bit too much exposure in the press in a negative way because of her propensity to like her male co-stars.
Miss Homebreaker's leading men, Cooper, Gable, and the French actor Jean-Pierre Aumont, weren't famous for their innocence.
Grace had a few men in her life, I must confess. She did not go into the Monaco marriage, like the white prince, the princess. But she was a human being, and she lived for between 18 and 25 before she got married. Something must have happened in there.
The Côte d'Azur in the 1950s, the location for Grace Kelly's film To Catch a Thief, and a perfect place for romance.
It happened that I got a postcard from her, and I thought this was very important because she said, "Those who love me, follow me." And she was supposed to go to the south of France to do the picture, Catch a Thief. So I said, all right, we go to the south of France.
By day, she worked with Cary Grant. By night, she played with Cassini. They became lovers and got engaged.
I think I was just a better piano player. I discovered the keys that the other man couldn't because they were afraid of her coolness and reserve. They were afraid that their ego would be tarnished by losing a battle.
And what were the keys?
Well, the keys was to understand that there were two Grace Kellys, what she appeared to be and what she was really.
My father did not like Oleg, only because he was divorced. And that was the reason he did not like him. Because, well, it was one of the things that you didn't do. You didn't marry a divorced man.
I don't think she took Oleg very seriously. Oleg was an amusement for Grace. And I think when her parents said, no, doesn't fit into the picture, I think she acquiesced quite easily. After Oleg, there was Jean-Pierre Armand on the Côte d'Azur. Those romantic pictures do not tell of talking about field hockey.
Grace Kelly may not have been in control of her love life, but she was very much in control of her career. In 1954, she was offered the part of a frumpy Irish wife in The Country Girl.
She went to Hitchcock to ask his advice, as you would to a priest. Shall I play the part? Hitchcock did not want her to play the part, but he didn't discourage her. He said, well, it's not my cup of tea, Grace, but you go ahead, you play it. You find out what you can do, which was a kind of rebuke, you play it and see what happens to you. Of course, she won the Oscar with it. And he never forgave her for that because she had shown that she really didn't need Alfred Hitchcock.
Grace was just 26. After winning the Oscar, she was invited to the Cannes Film Festival. What should have been a publicity trip was to change her life. On the train from Paris, the editor of Paris Match dreamt up a photo opportunity where Grace would meet the Prince of Monaco, His Serene Highness Rainier III.
Elle ne connaissait pas du tout le prince, à tel point qu'elle a demandé à ma femme ce qu'elle devait faire. Elle m'a demandé s'il parlait l'anglais. Elle m'a demandé à moi si elle devait faire la révérence. Elle était complètement ignorante de tout ça.
On May the 6th, 1955, Grace and Gallant slipped out of the Carlton Hotel and drove the 40 miles to Monaco. Grace had to be back in Cannes by 5 o'clock. The meeting very nearly didn't happen. Rainier kept Grace waiting until 4 o'clock, which gave her time to inspect the premises.
Et puis, on nous annonce qu'il arrive. Et il était 4h moins le quart. Alors il vient, elle lui fait un semblant de révérence et lui dit « Est-ce que vous voulez visiter le palais ?» Elle lui dit « Non, je l'ai déjà visité. » Alors il lui dit « Alors je vais vous faire visiter les jardins. » Et nous sommes partis dans les jardins, nous les avons laissés marcher devant, assez loin d'eux pour qu'ils se sentent tranquilles. Et là, ils font tout le tour et ils s'arrêtent devant une cage où il y avait un tigre que lui avait offert à Rainier l'empereur d'Indochine, Baudai. Et Rainier va vers le tigre et lui tapote sur la tête, comme ça, comme si c'était un petit chien, un petit chiot. Et là, elle a été très impressionnée. Je l'ai remarqué à ce moment-là. Et là, il y a eu un déclic. En route, je lui ai demandé « Est-ce qu'il vous a plu et vous avez sympathisé ?» Elle m'a dit « Oh, he's very charming », mais c'est tout. Elle n'a plus rien dit d'autre. Autrement, elle était absolument impassible, toujours. Elle a toujours été comme ça.
When she and Rainier started to write to each other in the summer of 1955, not even her closest friends knew what was going on. Later that year, she said she had something important to announce. In those days, that meant a man.
We all sat up all night trying to figure out who it could be, because we thought of everybody she'd been in love with or gone with, or even some person from Philadelphia her family had fixed her up with when we thought maybe they met again and she changed her mind. I mean, it was ridiculous. We had no idea.
A big day in Philadelphia when millionaire John B. Kelly's daughter, film star Grace Kelly, announces her engagement to Prince Rainier, the 32-year-old ruler of the pocket state of Monaco. A pretty famous pocket at that. It consists almost entirely of Monte Carlo. In a few months, Miss Kelly will be Her Serene Highness Princess Rainier. It's not often a film star's marriage affects the map of Europe, but this one may. And that's why the flags are out in Monaco. For if Prince Rainier were to die without an heir, the tiny state would become French territory, and its 20,000 population would be subject to French taxes and the French call-up.
I mean, the Kellys totally approved of Prince Rainier. Well, I mean, for a bricklayer to millionaire, why not to European royalty? It sounds good.
Henri Maxence Bertrand, ici présent, selon le rite de notre mère, la Sainte Église.
At the very moment of the wedding, Grace had a bitter reminder of her past conflict with her mother. Just then, Mrs. Kelly decided to sell a series of articles about her daughter's love life, listing each of Grace's boyfriends and escorts from the age of 14 to just before she married Rainier.
Grace and Omar behaved like happy, uninhibited lovers in a secret rendezvous.
Grace was very hurt by the personal article that her mother sold. Her mother said it was for charity, and Grace said she didn't care what it was for. It was a divulging of her own private and personal life. I don't think Mrs. Kelly was too sensitive to Grace's real need for discretion and privacy.
Grace tried to put the incident behind her. She threw herself into her new role as Princess Grace. She brought Monaco glamour, respectability, and the all-important heirs. Caroline was born in 1957, and Albert the following year.
La prospérité monégasque a commencé vraiment avec le mariage de la star d'Hollywood et du prince charmant. Et donc, à partir de là, déjà, ça a été comme un énorme coup de projecteur sur la principauté, et ensuite la princesse Grace, d'abord par sa qualité de représentation, et ensuite par son rôle effectif, personnel directement, notamment ce qu'on appelle le charity show, si vous voulez, la Croix-Rouge, etc., où elle a un rôle très actif et très habile, très efficace, et ensuite aussi, ce que l'on sait moins, dans son rôle de conseiller, elle était très importante, ses avis étaient très écoutés.
At first, however, Grace felt a little isolated. There were many pressures in Monaco, and she needed people to confide in. One of those she turned to was her old teacher.
She'd allude to the fact that it wasn't easy. It wasn't an easy life. She was always center stage, very little private life. You might say, well, she was trained to be center stage as an actress. That's true, but this was different. And she didn't know much French, you know, when she married Rainier. That was a whole new thing, that she had to perfect her French. And I do think it was difficult in the beginning for an American girl. She was an all-American girl, trying to be what the people of Monaco wanted her to be.
I think she approached the role of the Princess Grace, Her Serene Highness of Monaco, as if it was a Hollywood role. And then she discovered, of course, that it was a role she had to play for life. It just wasn't a role that finished with a film. And anyhow, being the wife of Prince Rainier was a commitment to an experience that lasted far longer than the 7-year contract with any Hollywood studio.
But Hollywood always wanted to lure Grace back. In 1962, after she had a miscarriage, Alfred Hitchcock, knowing how much she missed acting, decided to offer her what would have been her most challenging and subtlest part, Marnie, a frigid, tormented kleptomaniac.
Well, the assumption was that Grace was going to act again. Nobody had said in the marriage contract, you're not going to act again. It was just when and how.
I think if it was just up to Rainier, he didn't want it, but she could have talked him into it. But the people, the Monegasques, did not want her, not their princess, to be in making love to somebody else, you know, kissing someone else on screen.
When Grace wrote to Hitchcock, she referred to his habit of calling actors cattle.
Dear Hitch, it was heartbreaking for me to leave the picture. I hate the fact there are probably many other cattle who could play the part equally well. Despite that, I hope to remain one of your sacred cows. Yours affectionately, Grace.
The part went finally to Tippi Hedren.
I can't imagine what Grace went through. I think she really would have liked to have done this role of Marnie. I also can understand the principality saying absolutely not. We can't have our princess making a motion picture, much less playing a role where she is a compulsive thief. I mean, this could never happen.
I think she was deeply hurt by that, and she realized that what she had always wanted in her life was going to be lost. She would never be able to act again, which is what she had wanted more than anything else.
For the next 25 years, Grace was left to play the only part she was allowed to: wife, sponsor of good works, and mother. At first, the children were a joy, but it wasn't always happy families. In one of her rare interviews, Grace admitted some of the problems.
It's very difficult for children to grow up in a goldfish bowl and have the spotlight on them. Certainly children are going to do silly things growing up and make mistakes. All teenagers do things that, you know, later that you can say, oh, well, you know, I was foolish. But it's very hard to do that with a spotlight on you.
You know, Stephanie has her big thing next week.
Oh,
that
her
she has to do.
gymnastics championship.
Yes.
So Papa will be here with her for that.
One of the ways Grace tried to cope with the problems was touchingly traditional.
I think she prayed a lot for her children, and she would call me when I was in Paris and say, oh, Mother, Carolyn is having this exam. Would you pray that she do well? Or I'm concerned about this. Would you pray that this would come out all right? She had a real devotion to prayer and the communion of saints, that is, that we pray for each other.
With time, the fairy tale marriage developed its tensions, some because women's expectations were changing in the late 70s.
Grace was sad not to have an active, creative life. First of all, I think Grace missed being a working person. I mean, it's a funny thing to say, and I think it's a thing that husbands, and certainly Rainier, didn't understand.
There was such a sense of waste. I said, have you any hobbies? And she said, yes, one of my greatest hobbies is dried flowers. And I looked around this morning room we were sitting in, the former rulers of Monaco on the walls, historically dead, the tables covered with pictures of the present royal family, reasonably alive. And I thought to myself, my God, you had the most wonderful career in Hollywood. You personified so many fascinating things for people. And here you are, immersed in a life of dried flowers.
She was blue. But as her friend, maybe I cheered her up. And therefore, we didn't see the real depth of each other's unhappiness. But we did talk about really serious problems. And they were there, and her capacity to be serious was a very, very strong one.
Très souvent, elle partait seule de l'autre côté de la frontière de Menton, avant Vintimille, parce que c'est là qu'on faisait les meilleures pâtes. Elle allait seule manger des pâtes, mais elle en mangeait beaucoup. C'est sans doute ce qui l'avait fait grossir. Je crois que ça, c'est quand les périodes où elle n'était pas très heureuse.
But now, when she felt so vulnerable, the usual consolations, the church, champagne, romance, weren't enough. In 1982, Grace came to this village in the Beaujolais region of France with one of her best friends, the French singer Colette de Rial. Colette and other people close to Grace in Monaco had a taste for the mystical. What has never been publicly known before is that they introduced her to a bizarre and deadly sect. This private video shows that the ceremonies of the Order of the Solar Temple were partly Catholic and partly occult. Recruits went through strange rituals.
Sometimes Grace's spirituality was in conflict with her Catholicism, if you know what I mean, because sometimes within Catholicism there's a more narrowly defined set of definitions than perhaps one comes to as one grows spiritually.
A number of Grace's Monaco friends were in the Order of the Solar Temple. It attracted many intelligent and successful people who were after ultimate spiritual truth. It stayed an obscure cult till 1994. Then, a macabre succession, 5 members were murdered in Montreal. 24 hours later, 48 died in mysterious circumstances in Switzerland. A year later, 16 more were murdered in France. Before these deaths, in the late 70s and early 80s, the order had chapels all over southern France. The one in Monaco was run by Grace Kelly and Prince Rainier's closest friend, Jean-Louis Masson.
Loulou Marsan, ça a été le seul, c'est un monégasque, c'était le seul ami véritable de Rainier. C'est à la fois son ami personnel, parce que Rainier c'est quelqu'un de très solitaire et qui n'a pas d'amis vraiment, quoi. Loulou Marsan, c'est le seul, c'est un ami d'enfance. Et il était à la fois craint et admiré en principauté. Craint parce que c'est quelqu'un de forte personnalité, admiré aussi. Et puis c'était l'ami donc du prince Rainier, c'est lui qui s'occupait des affaires personnelles de Rainier, qui était donc le secret du dieu, si vous voulez, monégasque. Marsan s'était donc épris d'ésotérisme et il avait créé l'ordre du temple solaire dans sa villa qui était au-dessus de Monaco, à Pègue. Il y avait un temple effectivement où il réunissait donc les adeptes, mais pour ce qu'on sait, ça s'était resté purement spirituel.
What attracted many distinguished people was that the Solar Temple told them that they were the spiritual elite whose righteousness and secret knowledge would save the world. But in the late 70s, the order became more sinister. Marsan allowed it to be taken over by Joseph de Mambro, a hypnotist who'd been convicted of fraud. He conducted esoteric ceremonies in which believers saw dramatic apparitions of saints, spiritual treasures, and more.
Nous avons des maîtres qui viennent nous voir. Nous avons des Excalibur qui se matérialisent. Nous avons la menorah, le chandelier à 7 branches qui a appartenu à l'Arche d'Alliance. Et un jour, le Saint Graal, que tous les chevaliers de la table ronde ont cherché, s'est matérialisé dans l'Arche d'Alliance. Avec un rayonnement lumineux.
Tu n'avais pas de doute.
Mais non, on est tombé à genoux. Mais à genoux, on pleurait. On pleurait de... C'était plus que de la joie, c'était de voir le Saint Graal.
Huguenin himself discovered later that the apparitions were holograms, but these tricks were convincing enough to fool many worldly people seeking spiritual truths. Like them, Grace Kelly was a seeker.
She had a deep sense of spirit, connection to the universe, connection to people, animals, nature, flowers. A deep sense of an order in the universe with which she somehow wanted to be in harmony.
Grace Kelly took her spiritual journey further than anyone believed. This is Villiers-Morgon in the heart of the Beaujolais country. In 1983, Franciscan friars bought a huge old manor in the village of Morgon. The lease shows it was owned by the Order of the Solar Temple.
C'était toujours marqué l'ordre souverain du temple solaire. Et donc ici, ça s'appelait la commanderie Saint-Jean-Baptiste. Et il y avait toujours la référence d'une adresse à Monaco. Donc apparemment, le siège principal de la maison, enfin, de ces gens était à Monaco. C'est les gens qui disaient des Templiers qui étaient là avant nous. Donc ils venaient un petit peu en réunion, en faisant ce qu'ils appelaient des séminaires un peu. Et donc déjà, la cave, qui était autrefois la cave qui servait pour stocker le vin, avait été un peu transformée en, je dirais, un lieu un peu spirituel, quoi. Et donc c'est là où il y avait cette grande table ronde de 4 mètres de diamètre en béton armé et qui où il y avait qui étaient un peu partagés comme en tranches, comme une tarte, comme un gâteau. Et donc il y avait les 12 apôtres et puis le Christ. Et donc en plus, je disais qu'il y avait des signes kabbalistiques dessus.
This mixture of the Christian and the occult was the hallmark of the Solar Temple. After 1973, the Templar rituals here were kept secret. One of the few still alive to have witnessed them is a man who worked for Di Mambro for years.
Toutes les femmes qui se sont retrouvées mêlées dans les affaires de l'ordre du temple solaire, ce n'étaient que des femmes qui étaient au niveau 50 ans, ce n'étaient que des femmes qui étaient dépressives parce qu'elles étaient seules ou elles vivaient, pour ainsi dire, complètement bloquées et qui n'avaient plus aucune illusion. C'est pour ça qu'à une, il lui a fait croire qu'elle allait retrouver la jeunesse éternelle et à l'autre, à ce qu'on en a parlé, elle devenait l'élu du cosmos.
Gracie's friend, the French singer Colette de Réal, was often seen in the village of Morgon, and she brought Grace there for a strange ceremony. It was presided over by a charismatic Belgian doctor, Luc Juret.
C'est par ici que la voiture qui a convoyé Grace à Monaco est arrivée par là. C'était une Jaguar grise foncée avec l'intérieur en cuir blanc qui était accompagnée de Colette de Réal. Princesse Grace, lorsque je l'ai vue, moi je l'ai vue arriver, elle semblait un peu très effrayée, elle avait l'air anxieuse. Et la voiture était rentrée dans la cour entièrement, qui est privée, qui est fermée, que personne ne peut voir de l'extérieur. À ce moment-là, la personne qui devait participer à la cérémonie était montée à l'appartement de maître qui se trouve au premier étage. On lui a mis de la musique, elle s'est détendue, elle a été déshabillée. La chinoise est entrée en action.
The woman was an acupuncturist. As criminal inquiries into the Solar Temple are still going on in France, she insists on staying anonymous.
Pour moi, je pense que c'était une personnalité quand on m'a emmenée, dans le sens où il y avait des fleurs blanches partout. C'est vrai. Et là, je me suis dit, ça doit être quelqu'un en dehors de ce que j'avais l'habitude. C'est Grace de Monaco que j'ai reconnue par ses grands yeux bleus. Ce qui m'a aussi frappée, c'est la couleur de ses sous-vêtements, bleu avec de la dentelle. Je me souviens très bien qu'elle n'était pas bien. Ça, c'est vrai qu'elle était dépressive, parce que ça m'a frappée. L'acupuncture sexuelle, c'est-à-dire qu'il y a certains points pour que la personne, quand je l'échauffe, soit comment on peut dire, au 7e ciel, quoi, comme on dit. Ils arrivent à l'orgasme. Et ce qui m'a frappé beaucoup chez elle, c'est qu'elle a pris son orgasme 2 fois en peu de temps.
À 7h15, elle a revêtu une robe de templier et à ce moment-là, on lui a fait boire 2 verres qui avaient été minutieusement préparés. Je ne peux pas vous dire la drogue qu'il y avait à l'intérieur. Elle a été descendue par l'escalier intérieur par Colette de Réal qui la tenait par la main parce que bientôt elle ne tenait plus debout. Elle a été allongée sur l'autel. Là, c'était Jouret que j'ai vu pour la première fois, qui s'est mis en position tête bêche sur la tête de Grace de Monaco, c'est-à-dire qu'elle était allongée sur le banc en pierre, il a posé son front sur son front, il lui a murmuré des choses. Il avait mis de la poudre d'or sur sa figure, et avec la transpiration de Grace de Monaco, la poudre d'or s'est recollée sur le visage de Grace de Monaco. Et à ce moment-là, ils ont demandé s'il y avait l'accord des esprits supérieurs, de la pensée supérieure, pour que Grace de Monaco devienne la grande prêtresse de l'ordre du Temple solaire.
Like many others before her, Grace discovered that being a high priestess did not come cheap. The Solar Temple often asked members for very large contributions. Soon after the ceremony, Di Mambro put pressure on Grace Kelly to give 20 million Swiss francs.
Vu que Grace de Monaco n'a pas pu sortir cette somme immédiatement, puisque ça c'était le travail de Di Mambro d'encaisser l'argent, elle n'a pu fournir que 12 millions de francs suisses. Disons qu'il voulait de suite l'argent, elle n'a pas pu faire venir cet argent.
This bizarre tale is not the only mystery of the last year of her life. In 1982, Grace finally starred in a film again. Rearranged as a 37-minute film about mistaken identity, astrophysics, and the Garden Club of Monaco. The Rainier family have never allowed it to be seen.
This is a document, beautiful images of Grace Kelly, Princess Grace, walking through her garden, picking flowers, being very sad, nostalgic. It's like in a big prison. Looking over the wall, there's a sailboat going by. And there are wonderful shots of her. There are scenes of her that are very kind of touching in retrospect. And there's a scene actually in the car, in the same car in which she had the accident. And she's kind of talking to this astrophysicist about that life would be a very boring place if we wouldn't experience pain, and pain is better than no emotion at all. And then she just sits and looks, and it's kind of very interesting study, knowing that in the same car, not far, on the same street, she had this accident.
On September the 13th, Grace Kelly set out from La Tourbière in France down the road to Monaco. It was here that Gracie's car skidded off the road, through a wall, and into land belonging, by an extraordinary coincidence, to Colette Derial and her husband. One theory was that Grace had had a stroke.
I just think she got dizzy of something, because, I mean, really, the doctor said that she really didn't have a stroke. I don't know. She had a spell, I think. That's my opinion. I have no idea.
Lorsque il y a un accident comme ça avec mort d'homme, automatiquement une enquête judiciaire qui est confisquée à la justice. Ici c'était la gendarmerie, mais c'était le parquet de Nice, donc le palais de justice de Nice, qui était directement responsable de l'enquête, qui dirigeait l'enquête, bien entendu, sur le territoire français. Or, la voiture, qui était en quelque sorte la pièce à conviction numéro 1, était amenée aussitôt en principauté. Alors évidemment, cette hâte à faire disparaître la voiture a laissé la place à toutes les rumeurs.
The world's press started to probe. They speculated if Princess Stephanie had been the person driving. Soon there were hints of a cover-up.
Did the palace know the serious nature of the injuries all along? Why was information about both Princesses Grace and Stephanie withheld? Was the cause of the accident really brake failure?
The British car manufacturer Austin Rover insists that the rumors were wrong. The head of the team they sent to investigate has now revealed for the first time that the brakes were not defective. Her death has remained a mystery. Grace Kelly was not the only member of the Solar Temple to die in mysterious circumstances. Since October 1994, 69 members of the Solar Temple in Switzerland, France, and Canada have also died, some murdered. But no one has been arrested so far. Grace Kelly's spiritual journey brought her into close contact with people whose motives were not just religious.
La fin est tellement tragique. C'était une chose qui avait commencé merveilleusement. Et puis, la façon dont elle est morte, tout ça, ça a été très dur. Et je me suis senti un jour, d'ailleurs, Olivia m'a dit qu'elle et moi, nous étions un peu coupables de l'avoir présentée au prince. Et c'est là qu'elle a trouvé la mort.
I think she was wonderful. I think she was a very, very controlled actress. So very beautiful. You know, so thrillingly beautiful that it was a joy to watch her on the screen. I mean, she truly had the movie magic.
I don't want to sound callous, but by dying when she did, she was spared many things. The loss of her beauty, the endless treadmill of the royal rounds in Monaco, that sense of becoming not just an icon, but a relic.